One, it is a little after 1 p.m. Central Time on my computer, and we are here for a procurement review overview. Just a reminder, any AI, robots or alike that you may have, we will be removing them from the meeting just because any information that they may transcribe, that information is not regulated before it's sent out. So we just want to safeguard any information that we share as a state agency, and we don't want any information or data being misconstrued elsewhere. So we will be removing all AIs in the meeting. At any point, if you have a question, please use the chat feature and we will get to it as time provides us. And without further ado, I will pass it off to Elizabeth Hewson, our procurement specialist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I am going to facilitate a training on procurement reviews, which I know everybody is super excited for because procurement is fun. So we're going to go through an overview. This presentation will give you a good basic understanding of how the procurement review goes, especially if you haven't received a procurement review since before COVID. As you all know, between the AR and the PR, a lot has changed from the USDA standpoint on what state agencies are required to look for. So there's a lot of focus now, not just from the programmatic side with meal components, quantities, counting, and claiming, but also, how you buy the products that you use in your program. So we're going to go through that. And like Marlia said, any questions, please put them in the chat. And at the end, we will go over them. Okay, disclaimer, like Marlia said, no AI tools. If they're in there, they'll be deleted. Our mission statement: develop extraordinary school nutrition professionals and provide strategies to increase consumption of healthy school meals. Here's the agenda. We're going to start by defining the PR, review process overview, setting it up, the procurement table, the review process, post-review, and resources. There are different documents that, will guide us along the way, and screenshots from a procurement review in TMAC. So you'll have that real world application of what the procurement review looks like. And some of you have already gone through a procurement review with us. And if you have that insight, I'm sure will be very appreciated from other SFAs who are on this call with us today. Okay, so let's define the procurement review. A procurement review is the federally mandated review of a school food authority's purchases for products and services paid for with federal school nutrition program funds. So we're looking at compliance with federal, state, and local regulations. And when we say that, I want to really clarify, because I know there's a lot of confusion, especially when we talk about county or state procurements. So any type of purchasing catalogs or buy boards that you would be using to purchase goods or services from for your school nutrition program, we will always adhere to federal procurement regulations, no matter what, because our programs are federal programs through the USDA Food and Nutrition Service. That being said, if your state or local regulations are more restrictive, so that could be your procurement thresholds, your processes and procedures, if those are more restrictive than the federal regulations, you will use those. You'll default to whatever's most restrictive, but you cannot use something that is less restrictive, no matter what your director of school says. That's not going to be allowable. Okay, and we're also making sure that your purchases are allowable, allocable, necessary, and reasonable. We want to ensure full and open competition and good stewardship of taxpayer funds, which we all know right now is a big issue with all of our programs, any of our federal programs. So we want to ensure we uphold that even at the very, very local level. And our procurement review, just like the administrative review, occurs every 5 years. And I also want to specify that the PR is not an audit. You guys are already audited through other authorities. Our goal is not to audit you. It feels like that. And a lot of times we might even call it that, but it's really not an audit, it's a review. If you have something that is questionable or an internal practice, that's what your internal audit is. Okay. So what and who is involved? So first, your school food authority is school nutrition procurement department. That's your school nutrition director, your director of schools purchasing department, and your finance department. So it might be your CFO, procurement specialist, whatever you call them. They're going to be involved in this process. I know it can sometimes be like pulling teeth to get your director of schools involved in an administrative review for our programs, let alone a procurement review. But the reason we encourage that is because it does impact the whole school. And to keep in mind that your school nutrition program is run as a for-profit business. So that's the difference between your general fund and your nonprofit school food nutrition service account. And that's also why we want more buy-in from your director of schools, from your principals and teachers and other LEA professionals, because that'll create a healthier financial environment, procurement environment, and program all around. Then we also have the state agency, which is us, Tennessee Department of Education, but also Tennessee Department of Agriculture. So that would be for USDA foods. And that's if you participate in DoD Fresh, Direct Ship, which was called Brown Box, or the Commodities Program. It'll be your assigned reviewers, your regional consultant. Keep in mind that if you do have a procurement review this year, it will not be conducted by your regional consultant. So we maintain that policy just as we do for your administrative reviews. And then you also have our school nutrition program division. That's us in the central office. So myself, the procurement specialist, Marlia, Josh, Brenda, Jolene, everybody who's involved in the compliance and policies and procedures. And then if it applies to you, we have third-party purchasing groups. Those would be your co-ops and the coordinator. So if you're a member of Netco or Baltco, that would be Rhonda and Amy. Third-party consultants. We see that mostly with charter schools. You might have a third-party consultant helping with your FSMC contract or vended meal contract, or just generally getting you up to speed that first year or two of operation. Either buying organizations, purchasing organizations, or third-party co-ops. So those could be HPS, Omnia, Byboard, anything like that. And then the last one are your vendors. So those are the for-profit entities that you're purchasing products and services from. Okay, so the compliance overview, I'm not going to go over everything here, but when you have access to this PowerPoint, these are all clickable links, and you can go straight to the regulations. Once you get in there, it's not, I promise it's not this crazy legalese. It's broken down very well on the eCFR, but it's worth really, downloading, saving these, signing up online for any updates that you receive that might be pushed through for the CFRs. And then USDA memos. These are specific to the procurement review. So that's the procurement reviews for SFAs and the updated template PR tool. And that will be exactly what's in TMAC in our form sets. And then the Tennessee Code for state procurement requirements. Okay, now the process overview. So what to expect? This will be a 100% off-site desk review. The only exception to that is if there's an extenuating circumstance and an SFA requests us to come on site, or we see something not quite right happening, and it would be best for both parties for us to go on site. Otherwise, this will be done totally off-site. We're going to look at review documents from the prior school year. So this mimics the resource management review, that financial review component of your AR. So the reason we look at the prior school year is because that's what's completed. We have a full 10-month set of data to look at. We're going to communicate with you via phone and email, and we'll use the Tennessee Meals Accounting and Claiming, TMAC, Procurement Review Tracking Module. And then everything will be submitted to us electronically through TMAC's review attachments. Okay. We're going to try as best as possible to alternate your AR and your PR schedules, but it might not always be possible. So this year we do have a handful of SFAs who will have an AR and a PR in the same year. If that happens, we will make sure that if your AR is scheduled for October, you won't have your PR until January or later. And then vice versa. If you have to have an AR in the spring, we'll do your PR before, so it won't overlap. Okay, the process. I'll go through this quickly because again, you'll have this documentation. So first you'll receive an announcement letter from us. You'll be contacted from your assigned reviewers, and then you'll have an entrance conference meeting via Teams. You'll upload initial documentation in TMAC, and then you'll complete the procurement table. And we'll talk more about the procurement table in a minute. From that, your reviewer will generate vendor sample selections, and then we'll receive the vendor sample selection via email. And you'll upload the documentation into TMAC. And then us, the viewer, will complete the PR and TMAC. There's nothing other than the procurement table and that initial contact information that you need to complete in TMAC. So that's also different than the AR. In the AR, you have those offsite questions, like for your county and claiming, what are your processes and procedures? You don't have any questions like that to fill out in the PR. Then once everything is reviewed, you'll have an exit conference meeting via Teams. You'll receive a findings report via email, if applicable. You might have a no findings review, which would be awesome. You'll complete your corrective action documents. It's the same process for your CADs in the PR as it is for the AR. Exact same format in TMAC and everything. And then the reviewer will approve your corrective action, and then you'll receive the letter of closure via email. Okay, so this is what it looks like in TMAC. You would go to compliance. Instead of going to review tracking, you would go to procurement review tracking. You click on details at the year under review. So let's say, it's 2023-24. This is the review year. That review year is your current school year. The documentation, again, that we're looking at will be for the prior year. So for this year, 2025-26, the year of documentation we will look at will be for 2024-25. And then this is the landing page for the procurement review in TMAC. So it looks pretty similar to what you see in the AR. It's just much, much shorter. Okay. So the highlighted items here are the only modules that you'll need to go into as an SFA. You'll have your contact information, which you'll update at the beginning of the PR, the procurement table, the corrective action documents, and the review attachments. So again, just like in the AR, every piece of documentation you upload is going to live in review attachments. Okay, so first step, we're going to set up the PR. The entrance conference will be a virtual meeting between the SFA and the state agency that opens the procurement review. So the lead reviewer will schedule the meeting with you. We'll come up with a mutually agreeable date and time. There will be an overview of the procurement review process, including step-by-step in TMAC. So the reviewer will share their screen in Teams and go over everything with you step-by-step. You will receive supporting documentation via email. So there are two documents, PRs and TMAC, which gives you another step-by-step with screenshots, pictures, descriptions, everything of how to complete your PR and TMAC. And a lot of that mimics this training that we're doing today. So that'll be very familiar to you. And then you'll have PR documentation checklist. And by every procurement type, so if it's general procurement information, micro purchases, small purchases, formal, all of that, it'll list out all the documentation that you need to provide. And it's a PDF, and you can either print it, of course, or it has clickable checkboxes too. And we don't need to receive a completed PR documentation checklist for you. That's just for your reference. And then we'll also discuss SFA-specific policies, processes, and needs. So we want to know what your purchasing preferences are, especially if you're more restrictive than the federal thresholds. And in Tennessee, our federal procurement thresholds, our state procurement thresholds, I'm sorry, are the same as your federal thresholds. What programs are you operating? Especially any USDA foods programs. Capital expenditures or equipment grants you received in the year we're looking at, and any special issues. Did you have non-competitive procurement requests like for sole source or emergency procurements for equipment? A lot of freezers have gone out this year, so that would be something to let us know. Have you had a lot of supply chain disruptions? Vendors who went out of business or were bought out mid-year? Those are things that we need to know going into this procurement review. And then you'll receive the next steps from the reviewer about how to upload your initial documentation and completing the procurement table. So that initial documentation will be received at the beginning of the PR, and it'll assist the reviewers in determining appropriate vendor sample selections. So first will be your detailed general ledger. If you were having an AR the same year that you're having a PR, you will provide that same detailed general ledger that you did in the AR. You don't need to recreate any documentation. Otherwise, we're just looking at expenses from your nonprofit school food service account. We don't need to see your revenues. We don't need to see anything from the general fund ever for what we do at PDOE school nutrition program. And then you'll provide your vendor paid list. That will be a list of vendors paid from the nonprofit school food service account. And what we're looking at with these two financial documents is, does everything match up? Do you have all the vendors that were listed on the detailed general ledger and vice versa? And if we see any discrepancies, we're going to let you know. And we'll ask you just to provide that documentation. And a lot of times, because I know most of the folks on this call are school nutrition directors, it's kind of out of your hands and it goes to your finance people. And that's also why we encourage participation from your finance professionals, especially in the entrance and exit conferences. You're welcome to CC them on any emails if you would like us to communicate directly with them. We are more than happy to. Whatever makes your life easier, because this can be a really frustrating review. We're trying our best to make it a little less frustrating, but we also know the reality of it. And we know that the reality is most of our food nutrition directors are not accountants or CFOs. And so we want to be able to provide you with as much assistance as possible. And the other two documents are your written procurement procedures and written code of conduct. If you're already using our template that's available on our S&P website, then you're fine. There are no findings. In fact, we just updated that. That will be going through the comms process and hopefully out within the next month or couple. Okay. And again, just a reminder, any state templates that are available for download, please continue to look at the S&P website at least annually, because we do make changes to them and we do our best on listservs to let you know when those are updated. But it's up to you to make sure you use the most current version. Okay, so uploading documentation. Again, if you've had an AR in the last 5 years, this will look very familiar. You'll go to review attachments, enter a brief description of the document being uploaded, and then select the appropriate category from the drop-down list. It helps us if you have a brief description, especially when we get into the vendor sample selections and those invoices. If you put the name of the vendor even in the description and then the category it belongs to, so formal, general procurement, micro, you'll see the drop-down list. It helps us quite a bit with reviewing your documents in a quicker amount of time. Okay, now the procurement table. The importance of the procurement table, just to keep in mind, is that this is what your procurement review is based off of. This is where you're putting in all that information, and that's what will generate our sample selections from. So it provides a full overview of your procurement activities from the prior school year. we're going to use your general ledger and vendor paid list to populate the procurement table. So you'll have one entry per vendor, which is your aggregate total expense. So say you had 20 purchases from Amazon. You're not going to put in a different entry in micro purchases for every single Amazon purchase. You're going to put Amazon and then the total number of purchases you made in the last full year, so say 20, and then the total amount in the comment box that you spent. Okay. So what we'll do is then compare your procurement table against the financial documents. Again, if we see any discrepancies, if numbers or names aren't matching up, we'll let you know. And then we'll input vendors according to the method of procurement. So if you have a good example of that is with your formal contracts. And if you have, say, dairy, and you only paid $8,000 to, say, Murfreesboro Pure Milk, that might be under your micro purchase threshold of $10,000. Instead of putting it under micro purchase, you would go by the method of procurement because it was procured formally. And it doesn't matter if you used Valco or Netco or you procured yourself as a district. You would put that as a formal procurement. Same thing with small purchases. If you bought something even for $500, but you had a description of the product or service that you needed, and you had two or more vendors you contacted and got prices from, and then selected one, and you adhere to those processes and procedures in your written procurement plan, then you would list that vendor as a small purchase. And again, your reviewer is going to understand what to look for and what questions to ask to guide you. So we don't expect you to have the procurement table completed perfectly the first time. That's very unusual. And if it is, that's awesome. Congratulations to you and your understanding of procurement. But it's not, the thing about procurement is that there's mostly gray areas with it. The amounts are black and white. But when we look at the processes and procedures, that's where it gets muddy. And that's why people get frustrated with procurement. But that's also where we're here to help you. So when you complete the table, I don't want you put in the following payees. You don't put persons who receive reimbursement. So, Susie from Grassland Middle School received $1,000 mileage reimbursement. We don't need to see that in your procurement table. No utility companies. The exception being, just to clarify, waste services for your trash, that is not considered a utility, and you'll include those. Cell phone companies, don't put those in. And same with employee benefits. We don't need to see your health insurance providers. That being said, when you give us your general ledger and even your vendor paid list, if they're on there, I don't want you spending time to remove those. It doesn't matter. We just don't want to see them on your procurement table. And if we do, we'll ask you to go in and delete them for us. Okay, so now setting it up. The first section is your procurement authority staff. These are any people involved in the procurement actions for your district. And you'll add staff for each person. And then your micro and small purchase threshold. This will be completed by the reviewers. It used to be that you guys had the authority to go in and edit that, but the new update took that away. So we'll go in and we'll look at your procurement policies and procedures, whatever's written down, and enter that information for you. And then in the vendor section, that's where you're going to complete each section based on your procurement type. You'll have one entry per vendor per category, and you'll leave the types blank that don't apply. So sometimes in the prior school year, you might have had no small purchases, and that's fine. You do not have to do small purchases if it doesn't apply. We should always see micro, and we should always see formal contracts. If you had an FSMC that you utilized, you'll put that there. And keep in mind, if you have a food service management company or a vended meal company, and they're purchasing, in your contract it says they're going to do the procurement, they're going to purchase the food on behalf of your district, then we don't need to see the procurement information for the vendors that they use, because the only thing that you procure was the FSMC or vended meal company. And then processing contracts. So that's only for USDA Foods commodities. And that's if whether you procured them yourself as the SFA or use Volco or Netco. That's where you're going to put Tyson, Gold Creek, JTM, whatever the processing vendor is that you have a contract with to process your commodities received from USDA Foods. You will not enter any DoD fresh or direct delivery information in there. Okay. No SFA action is required for cash in lieu. Okay. So market basket analysis. These are any formal contracts that utilize the market basket analysis method. This is the information there, vendor name, ID, general goods and services provided. And I'll say real quick for the vendor ID, that would be either the contract number or whatever ID number your financial system assigns to that vendor. And if they don't assign one for some reason, just put any number. We really don't care about this. General goods and services provided. So just a brief description, total paid to third party or vendor. That's that year-end aggregate total paid. So all your purchases, it's either, and the options are below 50,000, 50,000 to 250,000, over 250,000, or over $1 million, something like that. And you'll just pick whichever threshold. If you use a group purchasing entity type, so you'll select from the drop-down menu, if applicable. If not, you'll leave it blank. And then for all of the vendors in the comment box, I want you to put the exact year-end total amount paid to your vendor. That will help us select your vendor samples. And then any other pertinent information. So if it was procured through Volco or any other co-op, HPS, a third-party entity like that, was a part of a capital expenditure request, an equipment grant, sole source procurement, or emergency procurement. Those are the kind of things we need to see in the comments. Okay, and then this section, this is just on the state agency view. If it's selected for review, we'll check it. Otherwise, you won't see that. And then you'll save after each entry. Okay, group purchasing efforts. These are any group purchasing entities that you use to procure goods or services. So all of these entries look about the same with the information that you see. As you get more involved in these next few slides into formal, there's more information that you need to provide. But otherwise, anything that stays the same, I'm not going to repeat what you'll put in there. But for group purchasing for general goods and services provided, say if it's HPS, you'll put, third-party procurement services. If it's Volco, Child Nutrition Cooperative, something like that. Total paid to vendor, that would be your participation fees, whatever you pay to become a member of that co-op in the year under review. Okay, group type, select from the drop-down list, and then your comments. Micro purchases, again, each vendor will be entered based on your aggregate total expensed, and it may be higher than the most restrictive micro purchase threshold your district uses. And the reason for that, and we actually have a question out to USDA that we're waiting on guidance for. There's some conflicting verbiage, which I know is shocking to everybody. There's some conflicting guidance in USDA and the CFRs that says for micro purchases, we're looking at aggregate total for the whole vendor or per purchase. So, or per unit. So we're getting some clarification on that. For right now, we're entering based on the aggregate total expense. It might be higher than the most restrictive micro purchase threshold. If it is, we'll look at those individual purchases to make sure you're in compliance. Again, vendor name, ID, general goods and services provided, total paid, how many purchases were made during the school year, comments selected for review. Purchases made, we want to see those total number of purchases that match your financial documents. So go based on invoices paid. We don't need your individual receipts. We don't need to know, how many items on each invoice. That's not what we're asking for. How many times did you pay Amazon or Publix or Sam's Club, whatever it is. Okay. And goods and services, if it's a credit card, that it's Capital One and use that to pay Amazon or American Express Amazon, you'll put that in the vendor name, American Express dash Amazon, and goods and services provided whatever you were purchasing. So small purchases, these are the ones that require informal solicitations, 2 or more vendor quotes, and are pretty infrequently used as a purchasing method. And the reason for that is, we see this mostly with equipment or larger maintenance purchases for your equipment. Otherwise, anything that requires ongoing support, larger initial purchases, we're going to see a formal procurement for that. Okay, same thing with all them, vendor name, ID, goods, services, total paid. Was this a one-time purchase or did you use this vendor for multiple purchases? Okay, you'll select that from the drop-down list. And what we want to know, we want to see that informal solicitation where you wrote down even on a piece of notebook paper that you've saved, and hopefully you've saved everything to detail the full history of your procurements. Even if it says, we need repairs to our AC unit for Sunshine Elementary School, and we need a compressor, we need a condenser, we need Freon, we need whatever. And you're going to do one informal solicitation. You're going to call 2 or more vendors to get quotes for all these products, and they might be multiple purchases. We want to make sure that you're not using a vendor that you did a small purchase for multiple purchases that weren't in that original informal solicitation. Because then those purchases for products or services that weren't included, but you're still purchasing under that same vendor, will be unallowable. Okay. And then did you receive more than one response to a solicitation? Yes, no, not applicable. Was this vendor or contractor obtained through a third-party entity? So that would be for a small purchase. Say you got 3 quotes and it's that AC unit again. And you did, a couple of local vendors and then a vendor that was included on HPS. And you went the one with the lowest price, which you have to do for small purchases. You need the lowest price, again, which is why you want all those technical requirements and specifications clearly spelled out in that informal solicitation that all of the vendors receive. But say you went with the HPS procure contract or contractor, then you would put yes. Put which third-party entity you purchased from in the comment box. If you didn't receive more than one response to the solicitation, put why, or we'll ask you why, because we want to make sure you did everything you could to get those quotes. So if it was a sole source purchase, especially for any of your point of sale software, we want to know that. And this is also something to communicate at any time to your regional consultant and to me as well. And then we'll guide you through it. Okay. And then formal contracts, the ones that we all love the most. These are your invitation for bids and requests for proposals. Same thing up here, name, ID, goods, services, contract value. And then you'll choose the solicitation type, invitation for bid or request for proposal. Contract type, fixed price or cost reimbursable. It's almost always going to be a fixed price. We don't see a lot of cost reimbursables anymore. And then contract duration. And contract duration can be confusing. And there are 3 different options: more than 1 year, 1 year, or less than 1 year. So the contract duration refers to your base year. So most, and I want to say 90% of contracts will have a 1-year term. And that must be spelled out in the solicitation, which turns into the executed contract. And if you're not sure, just go back into the solicitation contract. So it should be 1 year. Most commonly, we see July 1st to June 30th. And then it might have up to 4 additional 1-year renewal options. So those are not taken into account for contract duration because one contract term is 1 year. And then you have the renewals, which are another year each, okay? But there are some situations, especially if it was an emergency procurement, or say you had a vendor who went out of business partway through the year. So you were able to resolicit and you got a new contract with a new contractor and it started in January and it went through, June 30th for the rest of the year. Then you put less than 1 year. Again, more than 1 year, we don't hardly ever see those and we advise against those. Did you receive more than one response to your solicitation? This should be yes. We hope it's yes, but we also know, especially for things like commercial foods, dairy, even produce, depending on where your SFA is located, you could have advertised perfectly. Your co-op advertised and everything was compliant. There's nothing excessive or restrictive in the solicitation, but you only received one offer. And, by the grace of God, that one offer was responsive and responsible, so you were able to award that contract. But that's where you would put no and include something like that in the comment or talk to your reviewer about it, and we'll ask you about it as well. Was it obtained using a child nutrition co-op agent or third-party entity? And then were any amendments made after it was awarded? So that would be something if it was the contract we're looking at was in the second renewal year and you had an amendment for prices, which we should see amendments every time prices are adjusted, either increased or decreased based on the cost price index. You would put yes to that. Okay. And again, in the comments, please put that aggregate total expense that matches your financial documents. So food service management company contracts, same information here. If you have an FSMC, which includes vended meal providers, we already have that on file. Josh and I are the ones who do your FSMC free bids and contract renewals. So we have that documentation retained, but in the procurement review, just like if you use a co-op, if you use Falco or Netco, we still have you provide all that documentation to the reviewer in your PR. And that's because it's a federal standard that you retain all of these records to ensure that we can see that full history of procurement. And so you can manage the contract. If you don't have documentation when we ask you to provide it, that will be a finding. Okay, processing contracts. We've discussed this only for commodity processing. Don't complete if you only use DoD Fresh or Direct Ship. Okay, and this includes your fee for service through a cooperative. So that would be Balco or Netco. Okay, you'll put those in there as well. And you'll go by individual processors. And to be clear, for your contracts with these co-op procured commodity processors, we want to make sure you have that documentation. If you're a member of Falco and GFS is the warehouse that distributes your processed commodities for this contract. I believe her name is Stephanie Boyd, and she does an excellent job of record keeping. Make sure every month you're reconciling and you're tracking your entitlement allocation, your usage, and your inventory. Because you have to, when we do these procurement reviews, it's not enough to say, well, Rhonda takes care of it or Stephanie took care of it and we just paid one amount. We need to know how much you paid to each of the vendors you used, okay, individually. It can't be one lump sum, and you need to have that documentation on file for us to complete this review and for you to track your usage, because that's money on the table and nobody wants to leave those products. Okay, step 3 is your review process. Vendor sample selection. This is the essay review, the school or the state authority, state agency review in TMAC. So this is a little bit different than what you see. So you have your contract values, vendor names. This is from the formal section. So TMAC generates a vendor analysis with the required criteria in the essay review, or essay view, I'm so sorry. So you see down here, it's formal contract vendors by type and the vendor analysis. So this column here, required to review, that's how many that we need to select for review. If we can select some that meet more than one criteria, as you can see with only one response and GBO, GPO, third party, we'll select those. Okay, because we're not going to make more work for you, but we're not going to make more work for ourselves either if we don't have to. And these are the requirements that you can see in the USDA PR tool for the requirements for selecting vendors. We have to first look at the highest dollar value spent, and that's that contract value total. And then we'll select up to 3 invoices per vendor, and that's up to 3. So say if you have a small purchase and there was only one purchase made, there's only one invoice, that's all we need. But if you have, IWC or Gordon Food Service and you have, say 50 invoices for last school year, we're going to select 3. Okay, we're not going to look at every single piece of documentation you have because it's a review, not an audit. If it was an audit, we would look at everything and pick it apart. So required documentation, there are a couple slides for this. So you'll receive a PDF checklist with the PR vendor sample selection email. It's that same checklist we told you about earlier. It's a PDF with checkboxes, everything's included. So for micro purchases, self-certification documentation, forecasting documents, catalog documentation, non-competitive documentation, small purchases, simplified informal solicitation, forecasting documents, and a little shameless plug here for S&P Academy. If you're not already registered, please register. It's next month here in Franklin, and I'll be doing a training on the procurement process where we'll really go into forecasting and planning as well. By American documentation, vendor quotes, vendor selection documentation, catalog documentation, non-competitive, formal, you have your pre-solicitation documents. I'm not going to go over everything in the interest of time. Solicitation, evaluation and award, contract management. We want to see documentation. And when the federal regulations say documentation to detail the full history of procurement, that means from start when you're in the planning process and you have your cycle menu and you're trying to think, what do we need? What are our needs for our program? Not just the food, but the equipment, the services. Do we need to update our cafeteria? Do I have an excess fund balance? We want to see everything that went into that final purchase that you made and the reason why you chose a certain vendor. So you have your commodity processing. So commodity processing is, we'll have to request the same documentation that was required for small or formal contracts, depending on the procurement method used. So commodity processing, you can procure, say, Gold Creek or a chicken processor as a small purchase for your SFA. But you would have to there's this requirements at 7 CFR 250 for what needs to be included in USDA foods purchases and procurements. But we're going to look at, because it's a different form set for commodity processing as the commodity processing form set, and then we need to also answer the questions for, was it also procured correctly, just as a procurement? So USDA foods values, usage reports. For FSMCs, same documentation is required for formal contracts. Approval documentation from us, so from Josh and I, USA Foods commodity reconciliation documents, if you participated in those in the prior school year. And another plug, if you haven't already turned those in and you use in FSMC last school year, please email the commodity reconciliation documents to Josh as soon as you can. Group purchasing efforts, signed interlocal agreements, those are membership agreements. And then your participation membership fee schedule, and then market basket analysis. And if you use market basket analysis, that's only going to ever be a formal procurement. And if you're not sure, we'll be able to look at that during the review and go from there. But no additional documentation for market basket analysis contracts beyond us reviewing it as a formal contract is going to be required. Okay, so the review process, We're going to assess all the documents you upload for compliance by answering the form set questions in TMAC. Again, you do not have to answer any questions in the review form section. This is considered the on-site portion of the procurement review. So first it'll be the vendor sample selections are generated. You'll upload documentation in TMAC after you receive that sample request email from us. The reviewer will assess compliance with documentation and then answer section questions in TMAC. Findings and technical assistance will be tagged as necessary. Just like the AR, our reviewers are trained and really great at communicating any issues that come up. If there are any questions or clarifications that are needed, which is especially common in procurement reviews, we're going to ask you. And if you tell us, hey, that's with the county, that's with so-and-so who's the procurement director, we're going to make sure you have the time to get those answers. And we'll always be happy to facilitate and having a meeting with you and that individual as well, because sometimes it can be difficult to communicate what you're asking for. And it might be easier for us to intervene, which we're always happy to do. We don't want you to languish and try to figure it out. If you don't know something, just like if we don't know something on your general ledger, if we have a question about it, we have a question about your processes, we're going to ask you. We're not going to assume or just figure it out. Okay. Step 4, post review. So congratulations, at this point, you're almost done and ready to close out. So to close it out, we'll have an exit conference as a virtual meeting between the SFA and the state agency, again on Teams, and this will formally conclude the procurement review. The lead reviewer will schedule the meeting. They'll summarize the procurement review, discuss the results, including any technical assistance findings and corrective action. And then you'll receive post-review documentation via email. There'll be the review report with findings. That's that thing that's generated, that report generated in TMAC, just like you get for the administrative review. It looks exactly the same formatting and everything. If you have corrective action, you'll receive a document on how to complete it in TMAC. And then for a no findings review, you'll get a review report with no findings. So the next steps would be uploading corrective action documentation to TMAC. And the due date for corrective action is 30 operational days. And what operational here means is no weekends, no holidays. Your reviewer will look at your SFA calendar, and if there are days when you're doing in-staff training, if the school is closed, if you have a half day, we're going to take those into account because we know, especially you as school nutrition directors, if it's a teacher in service day, you're not going to be there. And we don't expect you to come in so you can work on your corrective action document. So that will be taken into account. Okay. Findings and corrective action, again, just like it looks like for an administrative review, you go to TMAC, corrective action documents, view to SFA corrective action response. You'll add that attachment and save. You're going to complete a corrective action for each procurement review finding. Answers all parts of the required corrective action. So don't skip anything. If it says, upload documentation to support your response, a lot of times that'll be how we want to know how you're going to prevent a finding from reoccurring in the future. So this one here was from HPS. It was provide a process that the school food authority will implement to ensure that all contracts procured by third parties entities adhere to the procurement regulations. And then the citation. We always put citations first into our finding descriptions and our corrective action if we need to. And that's so you have something to reference. When we want you to provide a process, we want you to go into your internal written procedures and update them. And when you're describing how you're going to prevent it, we want to know that. We want you to upload that documentation to see that you actually put it in there. Okay. And then you're going to insert all written responses into the SFA corrective action response box. And then you'll upload attachments to add an attachment. Please do not add them to review attachments. They need to be on the corrective action documents. Okay. So completing the PR, once it concludes, findings and corrective action are recorded. We have the exit conference, you'll receive a findings letter. And then the procurement specialist will review the PR and findings. So I do a second review of every procurement review to make sure, was it recorded correctly? Did you look at everything? Do we need additional information? And also our team is really great at letting myself, Branda, Marlia, Josh know of any special issues coming up with our SFAs under review, and I'll be involved in the process during that. And then the SFA will be notified via email that your CAD documents module is open in TMAC. You'll receive corrective action documents within 30 operational days. And then the reviewer will assess your corrective action responses and approve or deny them. If corrective actions are denied, you'll have 15 operating days to complete the second corrective action documents. And then we'll accept corrective action responses. The TDOE procurement specialist, so myself, conducts the post-review check, and then the reviewer will close your PR and TMAC, and you'll get a letter of closure via email. And once you have that letter of closure, we won't see you for another 5 years for a procurement review, which I know you're also sad about. And again, always, and I know our districts here in Tennessee are great about this, but if you have any procurement related questions, even if you're saying, I'm doing this wrong, can you help me? If you come to us saying, hey, I'm not doing this right, I'm not sure if I'm doing this right, what's the best course of action? We're never going to say, oh gosh, we need to do a review or tag a finding. We're going to help you because we want you to be compliant, because we know that procurement's a pain in the butt and you have other things that are priority, like feeding the kids. And so we're here to support you and make sure that you have the tools needed to fulfill the mission of the programs. Okay. And then resources. Available procurement resources. Again, these are all hyperlinks that when you get this slide deck, you'll be able to click through. Please save some of these. These are really great resources, especially Urban School Food Alliance. They have some awesome resources. If you guys were at TSNA and were there for the pre-con with Dr. Katie Wilson, she's the executive director for the Urban School Food Alliance, and they are working on an RFP prototype with USDA. Consumer Price Index, that's for your price increases. Non-available articles list, these are for Buy American. American Commodities and Distribution, Department of Ag. These are School Nutrition Standards Acts, USDA memos, our S&P procurement page, which we're continuously updating, and then the USDA Child Nutrition Procurement Regulations page. Again, all great resources. These are what we recommend. If you have something that you find and is useful to you, which some people have done, please let us know, and we'll be happy to add that. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for your time. Okay, let me look at the chat for questions.
Yeah. I don't see anything, so I think you did a great job.
Okay.
So thank you, everyone.
Sorry that got a little long-winded, everybody, but if you have any questions, let this sink in. If you have any questions, just email your regional consultant. If you don't have my email address, I'll put it here in the chat. It's also on the PowerPoint. But I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
And you will receive the slides most likely early next week. That way we have time to process the recording and get it as a YouTube link so we can share it with everyone. Right, not seeing any other questions. Again, like Libby said, if you have any questions, please reach out to your regional consultant or to Libby, and she has her email address in the chat, and you will get a follow-up email with the slide deck and the recording as soon as we have the recording link available. So hope everyone has a great rest of your day. and we will see you next time.